This is John Carroll O'Connor. He's rarely mentioned these days, either in Ireland or in the city that made his name, New York. It's hard to believe that this man, who single-handedly did so much to champion Irish talent on the east coast of America, is now largely forgotten. Born on the 9th of June 1869 in Kilmanahan, Brosna, County Kerry, O'Connor emigrated to the Big Apple in 1888. 5 years later, he founded, edited and published The Advocate, a newspaper aimed primarily, but not exclusively, at the Irish diaspora. He was to stay at the helm of this highly popular gazette for a staggering 54 years. O'Connor welcomed contributions from immigrant Irish writers, poets and musicians, all of whom were afforded the chance to reflect on life in the old country and their new life in the States. He clearly saw promise in the collective musical talents of the McNulty Family, who, in 1930s New York, began to attract huge crowds to their concerts. Head of the family, Anne McNulty, née Burke, from Kilteven and Roscommon, arrived in the US in 1910, and 4 years later she married Leitrim man John McNulty. Following the death of John in 1928, Anne, with son Peter and daughter Eileen, formed an Irish vaudeville act, Anne playing the melodeon while Peter played the piano, guitar and sang. Eileen also sang and was known to dance to the music of her mam and brother. In 1939, O'Connor invited Anne and Peter McNulty to write a regular Irish music column called Newsnest for The Advocate, to which they agreed. Perhaps one of the most avid readers of The Advocate was Hugh O'Donnell, an amateur poet from Donegal who had set up home at 118 Madison Street in Brooklyn. O'Connor was clearly interested in Hugh's musings, so much so that he published quite a few of his poems, including Guibara Bay, The Exile's Dream, and The Maid of Lochanuir. In 1940, Hugh sent one of his more recent compositions to Peter McNulty, the 3 verses of which were accompanied by the following note: "I figured you might be able to whip this into a nice song." The composition in question was The Rose of Arranmore, which celebrated the beauties of a girl from the island of Arranmore off the west coast of Donegal. When Peter showed the poem to his mother Anne, they both set to work on transforming O'Donnell's verses into a jaunty, waltzing ballad. By way of introducing it to a larger audience, the McNultys decided to perform The Rose of Arranmore on the popular Irish Advocate radio programme, which was regularly broadcast from the New York station WWRL. Immediately after he sang it, Peter hogged the microphone and proceeded to ask listeners to write to The Advocate and tell him what they thought of it. Having received a mostly positive response, the McNulty family contacted the Decca label, who recorded the ballad and released it.
My thoughts today, though I'm far away, dwell on Tyrconnell's shore.
Always with a keen eye to business, Peter then used his Newsnest column to let his readers know that the disc was available to buy at Hopkins Record Store, 3rd Avenue on 93rd Street. The Rose of Arranmore became a massive success and was soon being sung by numerous Gaelic groups across the east coast of America. Returning for a moment to John Carroll O'Connor, who in 1892 married Joanna McGrath in New York. The couple had 9 children, some of whom died young. After John's death in October 1946, his grandson, Carroll O'Connor, became the new editor of The Advocate. But Carroll did not remain at the post for long, choosing instead to pursue an acting career. He went on to play the starring role in the popular American sitcom series Archie Bunker and in another TV smash, All in the Family. a young choral group from Derry, the Little Gaelic Singers, embarked on a tour of America back in 1961, and on the 7th of March of that year they staged a concert at Troy Music Hall in New York. Under the musical direction of James McCaffrey, they positively charmed the audience by singing the O'Donnell-McNulty collaboration, The Rose of Arranmore. Interestingly, one of those little singers was Maureen McGuinness, who many years later, as Maureen Hegarty, would include The Rose of Arranmore on one of her long-playing discs. Hugh O'Donnell celebrated his 77th birthday in 1967, the year he wrote a lengthy letter to The Advocate. Laced with nostalgia and the odd bit of humour, he spoke of his love for the wistful singing of John McCormack and made it clear that he was not particularly enamoured by a fad that was fast catching hold in Ireland, country and Irish music. I recently heard, he said, a couple of young Irish chaps on records, recorded in Ireland. They were singing in a sort of hillbilly panhandle dialect. Ye gods, I thought I was having hallucinations. Referring to the recent destruction in Dublin of Nelson's Pillar, Hugh O'Donnell had this to say: I wish to express my disappointment that the boys who blew up Nelson's statue in the Blue Yonder didn't follow up the incident by doing a similar job on the stone outside Dan Murphy's door. Apart from Maureen Hegarty, a host of singers have recorded The Rose of Arranmore, including Eileen Donaghy, Bridie Gallagher, Sean Dunphy, and Donegal's own Daniel O'Donnell, who in 1987 was filmed singing an impromptu live version in the place that inspired the ballad, Arranmore Island. And so ends the story behind The Rose of Arranmore. My thoughts today, though I'm far away, dwell on dear Connell's shore. The salt sea air and the Colleen's fair of lovely green Gweedore. There's a flower there beyond compare I'll cherish evermore. That grand Colleen in her gown of green, she's a rose of Arranmore. I've travelled far 'neath the northern star since the day I said goodbye, and seen many maids on the golden glades beneath a tropic sky. There's a vision in my reverie I always will adore. That grand Colleen in her gown of green, she's the rose of Arranmore. But soon I will return again to the scenes I love so well, where many an Irish lad and lass their tales of love do tell. The silvery dunes and blue lagoon along the ROSE shore, and that grand Colleen in her gown of green, she's the rose of Arranmore. And that grand Colleen in her gown of green, she's the rose of Arranmore.